Today I'm going to talk to you about a woman named Amie Harwick. Amie was a well-known person around Hollywood. She was a Hollywood personality. I knew her a bit. I have friends who were quite close to her, and by all accounts, she was just a really sweet girl who got caught up in some things that weren't very sweet. But Amie, the first time I met her was at Sharon Tate's auction, the one that Deborah Tate held in Beverly Hills, and all of Sharon Tate's personal things, not all of them, but several of them were up for auction. And Amie and I were talking about Sharon's brassieres. I didn't want that. I didn't want to buy Sharon's brassieres. I wanted her weird makeup and junk drawer sort of stuff. And I ended up with a lot of things. And there were 4 brassieres of Sharon Tate's that were up for sale. And I was watching the auction online, and I ended up just on a whim buying 2 of them. But Amie was after the 2 pretty ones, and she ended up getting them at the auction. And there's a sort of dark twist to that, which you'll hear a little bit later on. But Amie also came to the shop when we opened up on Santa Monica Boulevard. My good friend Lenora Claire was very good friends with Amie and brought Amie to the shop. And she loved the whole death thing. She was very vibrant and full of life, but she also liked things like taxidermy and the motor museum, and she used to do advertising. She was a model. She was beautiful. She did advertising for coffin cases and some sort of gothy clothing. She was seeing Dave Navarro for a while. So she embraced that dark side, but not like in an evil dark side. She just liked that gothy feel. They call her like a modern day Wednesday Addams. Well, this is long before the new Wednesday, but you know what I mean. And she came to the shop for when we did the unveiling of the Jane Mansfield car. And she met a lot of people at the shop. She posed for lots of pictures. She was just a really nice lady. In fact, when TMZ announced that when Amie's murdered, they actually used a picture of Amie at our shop with the LA County coroner sign behind her, which was sort of ironic. But Amie had, bad choices in men sometimes. Most famously, that's not a bad choice, but she went out with Drew Carey for quite a while, and theirs was a really sweet story, but that relationship ended before her murder. It was more about this other relationship she had with a guy about 10 years prior, who everyone knew, who knew Amie. Everyone was sort of on guard about him. When something terrible happened to Amie, which we'll talk about, everyone kind of said, we know who it was that did it. So today's story is about Amie. And I'm going to be reading her autopsy report as well. So stay tuned for that.
Hey, this is Dr. Amie Harwick, licensed marriage and family therapist. And in this video, we're going to talk about relationship jealousy. Shakespeare called it a green-eyed monster. And we all know that jealousy is a relationship killer.
Now on KCAL 9 News, breaking news in the Hollywood Hills. A famous sex therapist is killed at her Hollywood Hills home, and police say it was murder. Dr. Amie Harwick died after a fall from a 3rd-story balcony.
Amie was from Pennsylvania, and she moved to Los Angeles when she was in a relationship with a musician. She supported herself as a personal trainer, a go-go dancer, a bartender, and a model. Now, the relationship with the musician ended. She met a guy by the name of Gareth Pursehouse in 2009. On the outside, people thought they were a fun couple, good-looking couple. He was a computer expert and a comedian, and they were together for about 2 years, and friends called that relationship volatile. Actually, the police were involved in that relationship because there were several violent incidents that Amie had documented with photos. She dumped him, and there was a restraining order on Pursehouse, actually 2 restraining orders on Pursehouse, but clearly he couldn't let her go. Now, at some point, Amie got a degree, a licensed marriage and family therapist specializing in human sexuality, sex workers, and vulnerable women. She began to be called Dr. Amie Harwick. I don't quite know how that works out, but that's the way it worked out. All this time, Gareth was lingering in the background. She once lost a job as a family counselor because of nude photos that were sent to her employer. She figured it was him. Her home was broken into. One time her computer was wiped clean. She knew it was Gareth, but again, no evidence. At some point, she met Drew Carey, the comedian, the host of The Price is Right. And after they were together for a while, and I think it was a true relationship, he proposed to her, and they announced it on The Price is Right, and it was quite lovely. But they split a few months later, and apparently she broke it off. Some say his fame was getting in the way. Some say a lot of different things. It really doesn't matter, but they broke up. In January of 2020, that's when things took the worst turn. There was an awards event for adult film stars, and Amie was one of the guests there, and Gareth was there working as a photographer, and he saw her, and that sort of triggered Gareth, and he confronted her. She hadn't seen him in several years, and he started crying and making a scene, calling her a hypocrite and screaming, "You broke my heart," sobbing and falling to the ground in the fetal position and wailing. Unfortunately for Amie, her kindness probably led to her downfall. I spoke to my friend Lenora, who is a victim of stalking, continues to be a victim of a stalker. And I'll tell you, the stuff that Lenora has to personally deal with is terrifying. She is an advocate for victims' rights. She's been to the White House. She's been to the Department of Justice to talk about these things, about a defense for people who are victims of stalkers. And in my conversations with Lenora, I learned the expression gray rock, that it's a good idea to gray rock people who are obsessed with you. Just pretend they don't exist. Don't acknowledge them. Don't look at them. Don't engage with them. There's nothing you could do. There's nothing you can do to discourage them. If you get aggressive with them, they get more aggressive with you. If you're kind to them, they get more emotional and they get attached to you. It's better just not to communicate. As little communication as possible. Lenora says, be boring. Don't do something for them to ruminate over. Don't give them anything. Let them find a new target. As a human being, to her credit, she showed him compassion. Unfortunately, that was her downfall. She walked away feeling very uncomfortable and very threatened. She wrote herself an email, sent herself an email, and this became very important later on in the trial because it was her own testimony. She said, "Tonight I felt very scared. I'm pretty nervous that I'm on his radar now. It terrifies me that he's been obsessed with me for 9 years and he thinks about me every day. He's focused on harming me." Since the restraining order, the original restraining order, had expired, there was nothing really she could do. Gareth got her phone number and started to text her, leaving messages begging for another chance. She blocked his phone number, and she told her friends, if something happens to me, he did it. On her last day, she went on a hike with a friend and had breakfast at the Beechwood Cafe. That night, they attended a burlesque show at the Globe Theater. She was wearing a leather jacket with a velvet dress and a rosary. At 9 p.m., Amie and her friends went to the Nomad Hotel. Around that same time, back at her house, her roommate heard glass breaking. He was in the downstairs bedroom, and he said it sounded like a plate dropping. He thought it was the cat, or Amie just being clumsy. Not thinking anything seriously about it, he went back to sleep. A couple of hours later, Amie left the party at the Nomad and headed home. This would have been about 12:15 a.m. So at 9 o'clock, the roommate heard the glass breaking. At 12:15, Amie left the Nomad to head home. So odds are quite good Gareth was waiting in the bedroom for her for 3 or 4 hours. Because at 1 a.m., Amie pulled into her driveway. She texted her friend, "Send pictures from the Nomad." She said, "Send me pictures on the green couch." That was at 1:02 a.m. She got to the bedroom, and people can only speculate what happened, but because of the physical evidence, it's clear there was a struggle. Her phone was found on the bed, so she probably threw it there, or it ended up there after they were fighting. There was a lot of fighting. He beat her, she hit him, but she was fighting for her life. But he was much bigger and much stronger than she was, and he began to strangle her. Now, her screams woke up her roommate on the first floor, and the roommate, unable to find his phone, he was trying to call 911, and he couldn't find his phone, so he screamed up the stairs, something to scare Gareth away. He didn't know it was Gareth, but he was screaming, hopefully to scare the guy away. And he runs outside. He ran for help. He got trapped inside the courtyard and had to scale the tall fence, cutting himself, and makes it over the fence and goes to a neighbor's house, but nobody was at the neighbor's house and nobody came to the door. The roommate finds a guy walking down the street, and it's 1:14 at this point, and he asks the guy to use his phone to call 911. Right about this time, it's logical that Per's house was carrying Amie's body and threw her off of the balcony onto the ground below, about 20-foot drop, and at the same time dropping a syringe of liquid nicotine. Paramedics arrived, and after trying to save her life for several minutes, they took her to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead. Amie's murder happened on the morning of the 15th of February, like about 1:20, 1:30 in the morning of the 15th. So she was out on Valentine's Day with friends. They went to see a burlesque show at the Globe Theater downtown. Afterwards, they went to a nightclub. And what was relevant about that visit is that at the foyer of this nightclub was this big green sofa. And one of the last things that Amie got when she got home that night was a text from her, or she sent a text to her friend saying, "Send me pictures of the green sofa," meaning all of her friends sitting on the green sofa. And by the time her friend texted her the pictures, Amie was already at the hospital at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. It was quite sad. So what I'm going to read to you is her autopsy report. Now, several people have reached out to me asking if I want help with autopsy reports. And the problem with that, and I appreciate it, it's very generous of you to help me with that. When I do these videos, I have to just do them. And it's hard for me to schedule so if I call somebody, who offered nicely for help, I can't do that because I need to do it sort of immediately. So I do what I can do the best that I can do. I look at pronunciations and I try to figure things out, and I leave things out that are a little bit too technical. So what I'm going to be doing is reading Amie's autopsy report, and you'll bear in mind there's going to be repetition here because there are several people's account. We're talking about the forensic scientist who's doing this exam of Amie after her death. We're talking about the detective. We're talking about eyewitness statements and paramedics, and so and the witness, her roommate. So this is all this kind of information all put together in one document, and so you're going to hear some repetition as I do this. But that's just the way things are. At approximately 12:30 in the afternoon after Amie's murder, detectives, West Bureau Homicide, phoned the FSC, which I believe is the Forensics Science Center. I was working overtime in first call, and he advised he was attempting to see if a 38-year-old female's death had been reported by Cedars-Sinai Medical Center early in the morning. I was able to locate a matching case of an unknown 38-year-old female. He then advised me of the circumstances surrounding the decedent's death, and based on this, I subsequently amended the terminal episode, that's in quotes, in CME, and amended the mode of death to homicide. Detectives also requested an assault kit, an SA, and swabs for DNA to be formed in this case. And the coroner criminalist subsequently responded to the Forensic Science Center on the 15th. The forensic technician transported Amie to the FSC at 4 p.m. on the 15th. The location of her injury was on Mound Street in Los Angeles in the Hollywood Hills. The location of her death was Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The following police investigation information is preliminary and subject to change. According to the detective, the decedent resides in the front house at the location on Mound Street. Her male roommate lives in a small residence at the rear of the location. The front house is sloped at a higher level, and the roommate's residence is out a back stairwell from the main floor of the decedent's residence. The decedent's bedroom is located on the second story of the home. At approximately between 1 and 1:10 a.m. on the 15th, the roommate was awoken by sounds of a female screaming. He was able to tell that the screaming was coming from up above his residence and could hear sounds of some type of physical fight. He then realized it was Amie screaming. He began looking for his cell phone and couldn't locate it to phone 911. He went over to the front of the house and hopped over the wrought iron fence to the house next door and pounded on the door, shouting for someone to call 911, and no one answered the door of the house next door. The roommate then saw a male walking in the street and borrowed his cell phone and phoned 911. LAPD units arrived and officers jumped the wrought iron fence and entered the rear yard. By then, the screaming had stopped. Officers and the roommate then found the decedent lying on the patio beneath her balcony. The roommate advised that she had not been there when he had come from his own residence at the time that he heard her screams. Paramedics subsequently arrived and transported the decedent to the hospital. Officers subsequently found forced entry to a set of front doors at the front of the house. Upon entering the residence is in a protective sweep, they found signs of a struggle in the decedent's bedroom. A suspect, reported to be an ex-boyfriend of the decedent, is currently in custody. So this was the next day. Personnel from engine number 82 found the decedent lying prone on the concrete after a reported 20-foot fall from the balcony. The decedent had blood coming from her nose and had agonal respirations. Now, I looked up agonal respirations, and that's no eye response, no verbal response, and no motor response. So they were trying to get her to squeeze her hand, or they were checking her eyes for movement, and nothing was happening. And according to that, it's a GCS 3. She did have vital signs, but GCS 3 means grave prognosis, not likely to survive. They cut the clothing from her to attempt the life-saving measures, which you'll hear about a little bit more in the autopsy report. She was unable to be resuscitated, and she was pronounced at 3:26 a.m. at Cedars-Sinai. The scene description, none visited by coroner personnel as the decedent's death was pronounced at the hospital. The evidence, the criminalist collected all the evidence in this case. Body examination. The decedent is viewed at the FSC, the Forensic Science Center. She appears as a nude Caucasian female in her late 30s with long black hair, brown eyes, and natural teeth. There is an ET, a tube in her mouth, and right-sided chest tube. There is a left-sided thoracotomy suture and an exploratory laparotomy suture. I don't feel any obvious trauma to her head. Again, we'll address that in the autopsy report. But trauma probably has several definitions. I don't think they would consider a contusion or an abrasion traumatic. I think they're looking for a serious injury to her head, and that was not obvious before when the coroner picked her up. Now, something I should tell you also, you're going to hear a lot of talk about abrasions and contusions, okay? And the difference between an abrasion and a contusion is that the contusion is like a bruise, or if blood were to continue pumping, it would turn into a bruise. In Amie's case, it didn't. But that's impact with, say when she hit herself on, or hit a brick. That caused a contusion on her arm. It wasn't enough to turn black and blue because she died shortly afterwards. It didn't break the skin, and that's a contusion. Abrasions are actually skin breaking, rubbing against a hard surface or something like that. It comes from blunt force, and it has to do with the abrasion, with the friction of this hardened whatever surface it was. So a contusion is a closed injury. An abrasion is an open injury, not necessarily gaping wound. That would be a different type of thing. But an abrasion is a skin open, like a scrape or something like that. So just so you know, there's a difference there. So she appears as a nude Caucasian female in her late 30s with long black hair, brown eyes, and natural teeth. On her face, I see small lacerations across her forehead. I see petechia on the outside of each eye and some of the skin above her upper eyelids. I see petechia to each inner eyelid. I see small lacerations to her left cheek. The entire left side of her nose is abraded, has abrasions. I see several small lacerations to the skin behind her left ear, as well as some contusing. I see a small abraded area to her left jawline. I see several contusions to the left side of her neck. There is an abraded area on her right cheek. Her right ear is discolored, appearing to be contused, and has some small lacerations on it. Now remember, Amie fell 20 feet from the balcony of her bedroom. There are 2 abraded areas to her right jawline. There are 2 abraded areas to the front of her throat. There is a small, uneven, bloody area to the front of her neck. I see 2 linear abrasions to the top of her left shoulder and a cluster of small abrasions to the top of her right shoulder. I see small lacerations in varying sizes across her upper chest. There's a scabbed area to the front of her upper left chest. I see some contusing to the outer right of her mid-chest and larger abraded and contused area to her right hip. I see dark-colored contusing across the knuckles of her right hand. I see some abrading to her outer right hand and right ring finger and pinky finger. I see a contusion to her inner wrist. There is an abrading to her outer right elbow. There is a dark-colored contusion on her outer right arm. I see a dark-colored contusing across her knuckles, the knuckles of her left hand. There's a large abraded area and a large amount of dark-colored contusing to the exterior of her left hand and wrist. I see some contusing along the inner left wrist and inner side of her left hand. I see a braiding to her inner left elbow. Her fingernails are intact. Along the outside of her right thigh, I see several lacerations of varying length. I see a darkly scabbed abrasion to her right knee. I see faint contusing to the inner left shin. There's an apparent puncture mark to her inner left lower leg. No visual back exam was performed. Identification, she was identified as Amie Nicole Harwick through Department of Justice fingerprints. What I just read was a summarization of the autopsy report by the scientist and by the detective. What I'm going to read for you now, and I'm going to edit it considerably because it's repetitive, but this is the actual autopsy report, the physical examination of Amie. I'm going to try to use as few very complicated words as I can, but I'll still get the point across. I'll just be leaving out a lot of the really, really scientific jargon. And a lot of it you've heard in that report, in the summarization by the coroner. But here I'm going to read some of the technical details of her death. And this is the autopsy report. This is the actual report. Cause of death, blunt force injuries to the head and torso, evidence of manual strangulation. Blunt force injuries of the head and torso, abrasions and contusions of the forehead and face. Abrasions and contusions to the torso, evidence of manual strangulation, abrasions and contusions to her neck, evidence of an altercation. Abrasions and contusions, right shoulder, arm, elbow, and forearm. Patterned contusions, right shoulder. Abrasion and contusions, right fingers and hand. Abrasions and contusions, left elbow. Contusions, left wrist, hand, and fingers. Abrasions and contusions, right lower extremity. Abrasions and contusions, left lower extremities. She also had pre-existing conditions, natural disease. I see cerebral edema, pulmonary congestion and edema, moderate coronary arteriosclerosis, and mild to moderate peripheral arteriosclerosis. The injury date was the 15th of February 2020. External examination. The body is identified by toe tags and in that of an unembalmed, refrigerated, light-color-skinned young adult female who appears to be the reported age of 38 years old. Her body weighs 130 pounds and measures 67 inches in length and is well-built and well-nourished. The skin has no identifying marks. Rigor mortis is present. Livor mortis is present and fixed in the posterior surfaces of the body, which means the blood is settled. If you follow these things before, the blood is settled. So she'd been on her back in a gurney waiting for autopsy. So the blood in her body was seeping downwards. It wasn't pumping anymore. So that's what livor mortis is. The head is symmetric and covered by black colored hair. There's no balding and the hair can be described as long and straight. cluster of petechial hemorrhages surround the orbits and cheeks. Examination of the eyes revealed that they're brown in color and the scleras are white. Let's see. Nasal passages are unobstructed. Upper and lower teeth are present. The neck is palpably unremarkable. There's no chest deformity. Evidence of therapeutic intervention. This was life-saving measures. Medical intervention present or within the body at the time of the autopsy include an oral endotracheal intubation, oral gastric intubation, right side chest tube insertion, left side thoracotomy, midline laparotomy, large bore intravascular catheter in the right groin, a bladder catheter, and evidence of cardiopulmonary resuscitation attempt. There are rib fractures, which is what happens when you do CPR. Odds are quite good you're going to fracture ribs if you're doing CPR. Needle punctures are present on the right antecubital fossa, right forearm. So those were, again, life-saving measures. At this point, Amie, her clothing was taken off. Actual clothing was taken off by paramedics when they were trying to resuscitate her. They had to remove clothing. Let's see. The neck organs are removed and oral lesions are present. No trauma of the gingiva, lips, or oral mucosa. There's no edema of the larynx. The hyoid bone in the larynx are intact. Histologic sections. Representative sections from various organs are preserved in one storage jar of 10% formalin. Sections of the tissues are not submitted for slides. Toxicology. Blood, gastric contents, liver, and fluids have been submitted to the lab. A homicide screen has been requested. 16 radiographs, x-rays, are obtained of the neck, head, and torso and extremities. The opinion. This 38-year-old woman, Amie Nicole Harwick, died of blunt force injuries of the head and torso. She sustained severe injuries of her brain, liver, and pelvis in an apparent fall from a height. Multiple mechanisms, including cerebral edema and exsanguination, contributed to her death. Injuries of the neck, particularly strap muscle hemorrhage, are consistent with manual strangulation. Injuries of her extremities, particularly her fingers and hands, are consistent with a combination of defense and assault-type wounds, suggesting an altercation. The manner of death is homicide. Part of the medical report states that she fell from a balcony after an altercation. And these images of her, look at the amount of injuries that are on this page. It's unbelievable, the amount of injuries. Now, you've heard me describe most of them, but this is one set of injuries. And for some reason, I feel like, I might be wrong, but for some reason I feel like these were life-saving measures. The evidence of life-saving measures. I might be wrong about that. But I do know for a fact, because it says so right on it, these are the wounds. This is a graph of all of Amie's wounds that she suffered. So after the fight upstairs, after the strangulation upstairs, then she was thrown off the balcony and suffered those injuries as well. And another illustration of her head injuries. And this next page of the document illustrates the injuries to her hands. That these probably, most of them, would have been occurred during the altercation rather than the fall from the balcony. Some of them obviously could, depending how she fell. And I do believe she fell face down. She did fall face down, because one of the questions at the trial to the paramedic was, why did you have to turn her over? And it's like, well, he says, in case, for obstructing the airway. They didn't know what was up with her, so they had to. So she was laying face down when they found her, so they had to turn her over to start trying to save her life. Now, the toxicology report was also covered in this, and nothing is determined. She was not a drinker. She was not a smoker. She didn't do drugs. One of the things when they found that hypodermic needle, that syringe on her balcony that was filled with a yellow fluid, the police or the detectives automatically assumed it was heroin because that's probably something they saw a lot on the streets. It had to be really strange to find a syringe of nicotine, and that had to take some real research on what's his face's behalf to find out that you could fatally inject someone with nicotine to kill them. And a lot of times they wouldn't show up on an autopsy report because you have to test for them. They would say, well, if there was I don't know, say there were certain types of drugs in somebody's system. I don't say I'm trying to think of something simple, some poisonous plant. If they don't test for that poisonous plant, they're not going to find it. So when they say, well, how could they not pick up in the autopsy report and the toxicology? Well, if you don't test for it, it's not going to show up. So if you don't test for a certain drug, that drug is not going to show up. If you don't test for nicotine, that drug is not going to show up in the autopsy report. So I guess a nicotine overdose, people would say, without testing for it, it wouldn't show up. So the guy did some research, but they did testing for cocaine and fentanyl, marijuana, methamphetamine, opiates, hydrocodone, and they did all these tests and nothing was detected. She was completely sober. So the homicide case report, again, is a witness statement. According to the preliminary police investigations information, at approximately 1 a.m., because we know it was a little bit after that now, on the 15th of February, this was after Valentine's Day, an hour and a half, the decedent's roommate, who lives in the residence at the rear of the house, was awoken by sounds of her screaming and sounds of a physical fight coming from her bedroom. 911 was phoned and officers arrived and found the decedent lying on the patio beneath her bedroom, I suppose. That part is redacted. I'm not sure exactly why they redacted that part. I can barely read this. Something were found. She coded in the operating room and unable to be resuscitated, and her death was pronounced at 3:26 a.m. Her ex-boyfriend is in custody. Trauma consistent with strangulation found on her neck. They notified the next of kin. They also did an SA, which you'll have to look up because I can't say those words, on her body, vaginal cavity, cervical, her rear, and they have to check all that stuff for SAs, and nothing was found. That was not determined. When preparing swabs to dry, one of the cervical set was dropped on the floor, picked up separately, and marked with a Sharpie. Brought from hospital, EMT intervention. The coroner's investigator didn't go to the scene. Additional body surface swabs collected. Yeah, the coroner didn't show up at the scene because she wasn't dead yet, and the paramedics showed up and they attempted to save her life, and then she was taken to Cedar. So the coroner didn't show up because she didn't die there at the scene of her house, but she did die at the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Originally, the roommate was a suspect because logically he was panicked, he was hysterical, he had a shirt on with blood on it, so it's logical that they looked at him. But ultimately, the story began unfolding that it was not him, and it was more than likely her ex, Gareth. Now, Pershaus was arrested within 13 hours. He had a black eye. He denied it. He was like, who? Amie? Oh my gosh, what happened to her? And he was arrested, but he was released on a $2 million bond. But he was rearrested the following day on a no bail warrant and charged with one count of murder and another of first-degree residential burglary, and ultimately charged with murder with special circumstances of lying in wait. Amie's funeral was held back in Pennsylvania, and she's buried at the White Marsh Memorial Park in Ambler, Pennsylvania. And the thing that it's really bizarre, really interesting and fascinating. Amie, as I told you, when I met her at the Sharon Tate auction, was bidding on Sharon Tate's brasiers or her bras. And Amie is actually buried in one of Sharon Tate's bras. Someone thought it was a very fitting tribute to Amie and to Sharon because Amie had an affinity, some sort of bond she felt, unfortunately, a little bit too close of a bond ultimately with Sharon Tate. Gareth was put on trial for her murder, and in typical fashion, the defense, well, interestingly, they never came up with a single witness. The defense never called a single witness, and they were making it seem like it was Amie's fault that she had photographs of herself on that balcony and she was too comfortable with that balcony and maybe she plunged herself off of the balcony, or that the nicotine was, Gareth was going to use the nicotine for himself and he had no intention of killing her. It was nonsense. It was a lot of nonsense. I don't think anyone ever doubted it. In fact, no, they didn't doubt it. He was found guilty of murder and also guilty of special circumstance for laying in wait because he was there for hours waiting for her. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole in California. So who knows what that means. So that's the end of it, I guess. Except I will say, for as vile and horrible as this situation is, there is hope for people who are going through this situation. My friend Lenora, who I mentioned to you before, she's been called the Erin Brockovich of stalking issues because it's groundbreaking what she's done. She's gone out and she's an activist and she has petitioned to get laws changed and for victims to have an avenue to pursue to defend themselves when a lot of people thought things were hopeless. And she mentioned a place called SPARC, SPARC, which is Stalking Prevention, Awareness, and Resource Center. I'll put a link to SPARC down below this video, and you can go to this particular page, and it's a free tool that people can use for some basic risk assessment. You can look over this form or fill out this form and take it to the police if you feel like you need protection, if you need defense, if you fear for your safety because of some lunatic. And there's no other way I could put it. It's sad. These people, Rebecca Schaefer, Teresa Saldana, Sharon Gless, so many people are victims of stalkers, and now there is an avenue. So check out the website SPARC, and God bless Amie Harwick, and the rest of them, man, go to hell.